instead of going into a single project of mine or so, I thought I look from far away because I was asked to give a perspective from far away. So I just try to speculate about the general theme of rotting. And I've done a little bit of research that connects to mine, and hope that we can get an inspired conversation from this. So I've prepared a couple of notes so you can read. That's maybe good. Let me share that. And I wonder if I can also show my face. Let me see. It's visible. Okay, good. Okay. Very, very good. Yes. So I was trying to think just very, very general, and I'm sorry if I'm sometimes a little bit superficial, just because I'm looking from far away in this case. What is special about rotting anyway? And as we are doing artistic research in a way in our institution, and you are doing it also, of course, it came to me that there's this typical thing that people would say, artistic research is always about dysfunctionalism. It's always where things break, where they don't work. So you're always going for the exceptions and so on. And I don't think so, right? I don't think that is true. And I don't think that is true for rotting either. So today I'd like to be curious to have conversations with you about rotting and irreversibility. Then in a second bit, irreversibility and knowledge and rotting. So I'll try to link these three topics. In a way, probably you've done it yourself as well already, so maybe I'm not saying anything new. There is, I mean, in a certain way, rotting is just a transformation, right? It's just just like any other transformation. So I wondered what is really special about it. And there's something that rotting makes, it erases certain differences, or it makes indistinguishable certain things, namely its own stages. So there's a stage, a process where each stage looks just like the next almost. And it also makes very hard after a while to distinguish the environment from the thing that rots. So there's an indistinction going on. And in terms of time, there's also a particularity that is usually very slow, although I thought maybe we can also call accidents like quick rotting, right? So time, I guess, is in a certain way relative on your life form, but the way we take rotting is slow and is also asymptotic, so we never know when it ends. In a way, it's kind of eternal. So it does change identity. It's like an event, but a very, very slow event. So it converts something from itself to its own trace, right? To just the trace of itself. So it is in the middle of becoming a trace. So yeah, I try to describe rotting as suspended irreversibility. So this I will look into a little bit more. So what has irreversibility to do with knowledge? There's always this problem of what everybody knows, right? I mean, this assumption of a background. I'm sure you know this picture, or maybe you don't. Probably you know it, but once you know it, it's very hard not to know it, kind of. If once you've seen the dog, you can't unsee the dog. So, in a way, as long as you look at it and you haven't seen it, there are many more possibilities to see this picture, you could imagine a lot of different things in this picture. You could interpret different parts as being related to each other and so on. But once you've seen the dog, there's less actually. And that's an important point I want to make. And it's also the problem that it's easy once you have it, right? I mean, it's difficult if you don't, but once you have it, there's something downhill about it. It's easy. I mean, there is a paradigm of knowledge as pattern matching, and I think we need an alternative to this. If we take knowledge as kind of synonymous with understanding, like something good, I still want to maintain that knowledge is something good, and not just something that blocks our head or blocks our view. So one can say that there is something like technological debt, like all this dependency we heap onto each other in ever new layers with everything we use. It becomes unmaintainable. I mean, we are in a state where it's very hard to maintain, and I think that's also a good reason why to think about rot. Of course, there's this kind of need for reverse engineering in there because one just can't. One can't have it under one's control, or one can't even have the. One can't invest the time anymore to learn it if one wants to be independent. If one accepts to be dependent, then the debt is clear. I mean, one is just dependent on other actors, but then it's not being felt as a lack of ability. So a similar thing is cognitive debt, I think I would call it. Learning something always means also being dependent on it and being responsible for it. And that can be very hard. I mean, all the school system, the education system is also an expression of cognitive debt. So in the sense, all experience is a trade-off. And to find something in knowledge that is not pattern matching is a search for an alternative or for a way to deal with this cognitive or technological debt. In a very general sense, one can say one needs help from media, one can say epistemic media, which help one to think or which help one to see things. Generally, I find it useful to talk about epistemic media because they don't distinguish between art and science. So you don't have to immediately distinguish these categories. And secondly, they are definitely there, these epistemic media, already since ever, but they are not mass media, and in a certain way, they are not communication media, at least not predominantly. And so what we need is kind of a special case of epistemic media that allow us to navigate between reversibility and irreversibility, right? So because otherwise there is always this trap of being not able to undo your own knowledge. So what makes something irreversible? I mean, of course, there are very many special ways one can think of it, but I just keep being very superficial and just try to look at physics. So in a lot of physics, and I'm speaking of physical theories, but I also mean kind of an ontological view on physics, time is a free variable. So in a way, everything is undoable in a certain way. It's a bit like a mechanism where you have an external pulley and you can just pull it through and it goes back and forth easily. So time is almost like space, right? I mean, space in a way is the epitome of reversibility. You can go and you can come back. And time is normally the opposite. And of course, there's an exception for it, the second law of thermodynamics, which which encapsulates this irreversibility. Maybe an irreversibility of time, some have argued, or of systems. So one can also what is that second law of thermodynamics? I mean, in a short put in a very short expression, it's closed systems rot. Right? I mean, as soon as you close a system, it will become its own trace. Right? I mean, you remember I said rotting is like becoming one's own trace. So a system folds itself upon itself and becomes its own trace. So in the literature of thermodynamics, there's the footprint in the sand. There's a classical theme. And the idea is if you see a footprint in the sand, how do you interpret that? And you can hardly interpret it as a process that the sand and the system you're seeing has produced by itself. Although with a certain probability, it could produce a footprint. And we all know that we sometimes see faces in sand and so on. But there is something about this trace, this footprint, which lets us conclude that there has been an external agent that reduced the entropy, as it is said, in the system, and now it's left again as a kind of closed system, although of course in a way it's open, but as far as our observation is concerned, it's closed, and now the footsteps slowly fades away. This picture is from Louis Buñuel, Robinson Crusoe, and Louis Buñuel made in the 50s this film and had a very interesting. It's a very funny way to interpret Robinson Crusoe, because in Defoe's novel, Defoe just writes off one footstep, and there's this footstep in the film just alone there. No footsteps. Nobody ever could have made them, actually totally isolated. So this joke is very nice in this kind of thermodynamic context, because we're talking of an isolated system, but in this case, we're also talking about an isolated footprint, like an isolated sign, which is kind of a sign from nowhere. I wonder if these people who wrote about it partly watched that film because it was very popular in the US. But so in a way, it is as if knowledge were an increase of entropy, right? We saw that once you see the dog, you can't unsee it. So there's a way down. But normally, entropy is seen as more, is less ordered, right? I mean, you go from a higher order to a lower order. But somehow we are going here from a picture which has many possibilities to a picture that has fewer possibilities of interpretation. That is strange, and I don't know. I mean, generally in the theory of entropy and so on, there are a lot of open things and a lot of open discussions. So it's not uninteresting to get involved, but I also don't know why. So that's up for discussion. But there is an important point, I think, is that the ability to perceive something in many ways that matter is a factor in this thing. So it's not just that a system. I mean, the normal interpretation of thermodynamics is that the number of states of a system that are kind of equal make its entropy. So if it doesn't matter, if you switch 2 grains of sand, then the system has higher entropy. And if it would matter that you change these, or if usually they take examples with shapes like a footprint. But I mean, to whom the footprint doesn't matter to the sand. So in a way, the question is what are the things that matter to something else? So there are many variants that don't matter or that matter. So my slogan for that is like, in knowledge, there's a weird downhill process. It matters in many ways. It matters only insofar, like it is a dog, and then nothing matters anymore. So seeing the dog is kind of halfway down. This is a bit strange. So what's the difference between differences that do not matter and differences that do matter? Right? We somehow want to navigate between differences that do not matter and differences that do matter, because that would be the navigation between reversibility and irreversibility. Okay, we need some help. One way to see it, again, it's a little bit superficial. I'm sure we could go a lot deeper, but this is one help I took, one route. We can look at computation and about the concept of logical irreversibility. Now, it's kind of funny that normally we take logic as being something completely reversible and kind of timeless. And in certain understandings, logic is exactly that, which is true in every model, and so on. So it's kind of timeless and placeless. Although there are kinds of logics that are not like this, like Girard's linear logic, which consume operations when you use them and so on. But the standard is different. And in Landauer's principle, now Boolean logical computations come out as either reversible or irreversible. So this is from 1961, and it has developed since, but I'm going back to the original source. You see here registers, and they are being converted by an operation. And depending on whether you can get back from the registers on the right to the registers on the left, there is a different way this computation takes energy or produces heat, one has to say. Needs cooling after. So an operation like an OR operation, A or B, is an irreversible operation unless you keep one of the old values. I mean, of course, you can always keep A and B, then it's reversible. But let's say we are not keeping A and B, we're just getting C. So if you calculate A or B, then if A is true and B is false, then C will be true, but you won't know whether this true came from A or from B. An AND operation is very different. When one of the two is false, you will get, or is that true actually? Let me think. This will be only true if both are true, right? Otherwise, it'll be false. Okay, no, it's wrong. It's also irreversible. I'm sorry, because it could be that that both are false, and that will also be false, or one of them was true. So, okay, make a one-way arrow. One can make operations reversible by keeping a certain value and by designing registers in a way. And indeed, people are thinking about energy consumption of computation nowadays, whether all computation should be made reversible on the systems or on the hardware level at some stage, although we are now, I think, at the stage where it's about only a factor of 10 below the noise level that you have anyway. But maybe it'll be there one day when the computation becomes more efficient. So I found that interesting. Most algorithms are irreversible. If you try to make it reversible, it's an extra work. So maybe we can wrap up a little bit and think about, okay, what is making irreversible and what is making reversible? So making irreversible, typically, I mean, there's a long list one can make: hooks, arrows, traps, turnstiles where you can only walk one way. Most algorithms, most things that we trace out Actually, just sound production usually is irreversible. And what is making reversible is containers, kind of repair shops or repair practices, undo trees, a sort of undoing things, archives, and of course data, data storage. So in a certain way, one can say that making things irreversible is tracing out something, and making things reversible is setting it side by side. But this is just, a very superficial idea, just to keep an overview a little bit. There's a minimal condition, I think, is keeping the system in a metastable state so we can still navigate. So there's a point of no return. We should not cross certain lines. One needs to maintain experimentation, and I find that the most important task. And of course, rotting in a way, like in this very epistemic use, is like this. It tries to keep in suspense this irreversibility. So we need epistemic media for finding ways of moving between differences that do not matter and differences that do matter. Of course, we do have a big problem where we also need that, whether the Earth will become more like the Venus or more like Mars, is also a problem of equilibrium or of keeping a system metastable. So just because today is global climate strike, I definitely want to reference that. So a poem last, to rot or not to rot. Thanks. Here's the literature.
So much, Julian. That was very, very enlightening. So we do have a few minutes. Are there any questions from the audience? So again, Till, if you want to speak from the Rotting Sounds team, maybe you have a question.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the talk, Julian. I was wondering, because you were talking about the irreversibility, difficult word, irreversibility of states in these logical systems, and you said that some more or less, some like dissipate heat and others do not, and this somehow triggered this idea of, if you think about computation in this classical electronic way that we are doing this at the moment, actually the amount of energy that is used in order to actually compute is so little compared to all this like keeping everything cooled that like it doesn't really matter to do this. And this I found kind of interesting, that it's kind of a superficial idea of doing this on the level of energy consumption, because we are using so much energy on other things already in a way. Yeah, was wondering.
Yeah, of course there are many levels of this. I think, of course, we are wasting a lot of energy by just doing things, but just organizational overhead, let's say, right? By not being able to decide together what to do best. So we need with Zoom right now, we send our data across the Atlantic instead of just, using a local server with our own system. So, and of course that takes a lot of, that's kind of social heat that we're producing, or kind of political heat, if you want. But this other thing, yes, this whole entropy that is in the calculation, that is irreversible. Actually, when I read about this first, I thought it's a hoax. It really sounds like a mystical thing. A lot of these thermodynamic things sound a little bit like that, because I think a lot of it is, of course, a bit imprecise, and to understand them properly, one needs a bit more insight. But also a lot of things are a little bit open questions there. And so when you ask, or when you said, we are doing these operations, and in a way they don't need energy by themselves. What did you mean?
They do need energy by themselves, but relating to to the like overhead energy that we are using in order to cool the system, it is kind of neglectable. So
yeah, right. And I mean, probably a lot of the energy comes from all these interventional aspects of computing, that you have to change things, that you have to save things on hardware or in registers and so on, that you cannot just have one register, have an operation on it, and have the same register, and that's it. There's this weird piece of glass that people designed with a 3D printer, a special one for glass, which solves these very, very simple cipher recognition problem, right? A handwriting recognition problem for ciphers. You just show it a cipher and the light will shine through one of 10 slots. So it's just a kind of light filter. And in a way, it will also dissipate heat, but not in the same way as a calculation, I guess.
Yeah, so this is then kind of parallel computation in a way. It's analog in a way. It's analog computation, and yeah, interesting. Do we have still time, or I can also stop whenever? You have a question? Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I found it very interesting. If I may quote you, that you said, learning something always means being responsible. So also like to rot or not to rot, who decides kind of, and talking about climate crisis or post-colonial topics or whatever, like who really decides? And do you have any idea on that, or who decides like what is going to be stored? And
yeah, I mean, it's obvious that there's no global solution for that, right? I mean, we need to get used to negotiate this all the time. And we need to be aware that who's ready to negotiate spends a lot of energy on that. And that creates in itself an asymmetry compared to those who don't want to negotiate it, but just say, we do it as normal, or we do it as was decided already. So if you want to take responsibility for a system, which is necessary, I think, that is work, right? That is intellectual labor or social labor or whatever. And I don't say, of course, that labor needs to be calculated into our calculations of labor value and so on. But that's not what I mean predominantly. But that just the awareness that taking these decisions and trying to make them together and not alone is itself a kind of work that also often cannot be done just simply by being, human beings. But we also need methods and need to learn how to do it and need to help each other to find out how we can decide things together and not just pre-decided or alone.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. If there are no more questions left, then I think, I would just want to thank you again. Bye to Cologne.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very
Have
much
a good day.
for inviting me.
Thanks.